This is the lost truth. You don't attract with effort, you attract by becoming. The universe is obedient not to what you perform, but to who you are in stillness. Listen now and return to that quiet power you never lost. The most powerful secret. Introduction. Ho, beloved traveler of the unseen, draw near, not with haste, but with reverence. What you hold is not merely a book, but a threshold, a relic etched in silence, unearthed from beneath centuries of striving and self-forgetting. Perhaps it was whispered by moonlight in the sands of an ancient desert, or dreamt last night by a soul just waking. It does not speak with the sharpness of instruction, but with the hush that only truth can leave behind. Its wisdom is not learned, it is remembered. You will find no formulas here, no promises of ladders to climb or thrones to conquer, only the sacred invitation to lay down all becoming and simply be. For in each tale, the mute merchant, the unseen envoy, the weaver unraveling, resides a single shimmering law. The universe does not yield to effort, but to essence. This is not a teaching, it is a transmission, not the gathering of knowledge, but the dissolving of illusion. Here, paradox reigns, that surrender is strength, that silence carries the word, that what you seek has always been waiting inside your stillness. So, wanderer of the inmost stars, release your maps. Let your breath become the cosmos, your being the altar. Do not walk forward, descend inward, for the home you long for has never left you. Listen not only with your ears, but with the soul behind your breath. And as the remembering deepens, the universe itself will rise, not to test you, but to serve you, not for your striving, but because of your stillness. Welcome, Ancient One. The universe is obedient, and it listens for the sound of your return. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Part 1. The Hidden Law of Stillness. Chapter 1. The Merchant's Impossible Sale. On the bustling markets of ancient Babylon, where spice-laden air danced with whispers of distant lands, Brandon Sullivan's stall sat peculiarly empty. His saffron threads gleamed like captured sunlight. His cinnamon bark curled with perfect promise, yet for 30 days not a single coin had crossed his palm. Each morning Brandon would arrange his precious spices in intricate patterns, rehearsing elaborate speeches about their exotic origins. He called out to passing merchants, listing medicinal properties and culinary uses with increasing desperation. But the more he tried to convince, the more potential customers seemed to drift away like leaves on the Euphrates. On the 31st day, as the sun rose over the hanging gardens, Brandon discovered his voice had vanished completely. A night of frustrated tears had left him unable to speak above a whisper. Sitting in forced silence behind his stall, something strange began to happen. Without words to offer, Brandon simply existed with his spices. He closed his eyes and breathed in their essence, cardamom's wild mystery, frankincense's sacred depths, myrrh's eternal truth. For the first time, he stopped trying to sell and simply became one with what he offered. As the market crowd swirled around him, a wealthy merchant approached. Brandon opened his eyes, but remained in that space of perfect stillness. The merchant lifted a pinch of saffron, inhaled its aroma, and without a word being spoken, purchased Brandon's entire supply at triple the asking price. By sunset, Brandon's stall was empty, truly empty this time, and his coin purse was full. In the silence of success, he understood. The universe responds not to our desperate convincing, but to our unshakable knowing. This is the first key to commanding the universe's obedience. Magnetic presence precedes effortless abundance. When you try to convince others of your value, you broadcast doubt. When you simply embody your truth, the universe conspires to reflect it back to you. Consider the spices in Brandon's stall. Did the cinnamon argue for its sweetness? Did the saffron beg to be noticed? They simply were, and in their being, they became irresistible. Practice. The stillness of certainty. Sit in perfect silence for 3 breaths. Choose something you wish to manifest. Instead of rehearsing reasons why you deserve it, simply embody the feeling of already having it. Let your entire being radiate the quiet certainty of completion. The universe cannot help but respond to one who knows their truth so completely that they need not speak it. For in the end, it is not our words that command reality, but the unshakable knowing that beats beneath them. Chapter 2. The Healer's Empty Hands. In the sacred healing temples of ancient Memphis, where lotus petals floated on still pools and incense traced invisible patterns through filtered sunlight, Jessica Martinez found herself facing an impossible truth. Her healing touch had vanished. For 12 years, her hands had channeled the divine force that mended broken bodies and soothed troubled spirits. The sick would come from distant lands, drawn by tales of the young healer whose touch could banish pain. But now, as she pressed her palms against a child's fevered brow, nothing flowed. Day after day, Jessica added more healing crystals to her collection, gathered rarer herbs, painted sacred symbols on her palms. Yet with each new tool, her power seemed to retreat further, like a mirage shimmering always just beyond reach. One evening, as shadows lengthened across the temple floor, an elder priestess found Jessica surrounded by scattered healing implements, tears falling onto useless hands. "Put them away," the priestess whispered, gathering Jessica's crystals and herbs into a clay pot. "Empty your hands completely." When Jessica protested, the priestess smiled. "Watch the sacred pools," she said. "They heal not by what they contain, but by their willingness to become empty enough to reflect the sky." Following the priestess's guidance, Jessica spent 3 days with empty hands. No herbs, no crystals, no sacred oils. She sat beside the healing pools, watching how they embraced both light and shadow, how they offered themselves as perfect vessels for whatever heaven might pour into them. On the 4th day, when a blind man stumbled into the temple, Jessica rose to meet him with empty hands. For the first time, she didn't try to summon healing energy or direct divine force. She simply allowed her empty hands to become like the still pools, ready to reflect something greater than herself. The man's sight returned. This is the paradox at the heart of all power. True strength emerges not from what we accumulate, but from how empty we become. When your hands are full of your own efforts, there is no room for the universe to fill them with its power. Practice the void embrace. Sit quietly and open your palms upward. Feel whatever you're trying to grasp, to achieve, to become. Now slowly, let it all drain away until your hands are as empty as sacred pools. Don't try to fill the emptiness, simply notice how it begins to tingle with possibility. For it is not in our fullness, but in our emptiness, that we become perfect vessels for universal power. Remember, the universe does not flow through clenched fists. It pours itself only into empty hands. Chapter 3, The Architect's Fallen Tower. In the shadow of mighty Ur, where ziggurats pierced clouds and mankind first dared to build towards heaven, Christopher Walker stood frozen before impossible devastation. His masterpiece, 7 years in the making, lay scattered like children's blocks across the dusty plain. The Tower of Morning Light had been his greatest achievement. Designed with mathematical precision to catch the first ray of dawn and send it cascading through crystal chambers, it would have rivaled the legendary works of antiquity. But, on the very morning of its completion, as nobles gathered for the dedication ceremony, a sound like the gods clearing their throats rumbled through the earth. Christopher watched helplessly as his tower swayed, cracked, and collapsed in a terrible dance of falling stone. In moments, 7 years of dreams became a monument to hubris and failure. For 3 days he sat among the ruins, turning a piece of shattered crystal over and over in his hands. Servants brought food he didn't eat. Fellow architects offered consolation he couldn't hear. His mind kept trying to understand where he had gone wrong, which calculation had failed, which foundation had proved unsound. On the 4th morning, as he traced patterns in the dust, an aged temple dancer approached. She moved through the ruins with strange grace, as if the fallen stones formed a perfect path for her feet. "You see only what is broken," she said, settling beside him. "But watch how the morning light plays differently now across these scattered pieces. See how it creates patterns that never could have existed in your perfect tower." Christopher looked up, really seeing the ruins for the first time. Sunlight caught the broken crystals, sending rainbows dancing across tumbled stone in ways his careful design could never have conceived. The very randomness of destruction had created something his ordered mind could not have imagined. "Sometimes," the dancer continued, "the universe must break our greatest works to make space for something even greater. Not greater in the way we plan, but greater in ways we cannot plan. This is the paradox of creation. What we build with careful intention often pales beside what emerges from surrender to divine destruction. The universe's masterpiece requires the raw materials of our shattered dreams." Practice the release ritual. Hold in your mind something you have built, a dream, a plan, an identity. Now imagine it crumbling, not as failure, but as transformation. Feel the terror of letting go transform into curiosity about what wants to emerge. For 3 breaths, surrender completely to the divine demolition crew that clears space for universal wonder. Remember, sometimes the most powerful act of creation is allowing destruction to do its sacred work. Chapter 4, The Scribes' Blank Scroll. In the twilight chambers of ancient Alexandria's great library, where papyrus whispered secrets across millennia, Amanda Rodriguez sat before the most important scroll of her career. The pharaoh himself had commissioned her to transcribe a decree that would shape the empire's destiny, yet as moonlight spilled across the pristine surface, her reed pen remained untouched. For 20 years, Amanda had served as the library's most skilled scribe. Her hieroglyphs danced with life. Her words seemed to sing from the page. But tonight, facing this crucial task, every phrase she considered felt hollow. Every potential opening line turned to dust in her mind. Hour after hour, she sat frozen before the blank papyrus. Other scribes offered suggestions, brought her sacred texts for inspiration, even attempted to place words in her mouth. But Amanda found herself moving deeper into the emptiness, as if the blank scroll was a doorway rather than a barrier. Near dawn, An ancient temple cat wandered into her chamber. It leaped onto her writing table, knocking over her ink pot. Amanda lunged to save the precious scroll, but stopped mid-motion. The spilled ink spread across the papyrus in patterns more profound than any she could have planned. Rivers, branches, constellations she had never imagined. Watching the inks dance, Amanda suddenly understood. The blank scroll wasn't empty at all. It contained every possible text, every potential truth, waiting to emerge. Her task wasn't to fill emptiness, but to allow fullness to reveal itself. When the pharaoh arrived that morning, Amanda presented him with the scroll, now dried into abstract patterns that seemed to shift with meaning as he turned it in the light. "This," he declared, "is the truest decree ever written. It speaks in the language of infinity itself. This is the secret of creation. What appears as emptiness is actually infinite potential and perfect balance. When we rush to fill the void with our small intentions, we block the universe from expressing its limitless possibilities. Practice the blank mind. Sit before an empty page or clear space. Instead of seeing absence, recognize it as the presence of all possibility. Don't try to fill it. Let it fill you. For 3 breaths, become as empty as that space. Notice how thoughts arise not from your effort, but from the fertile void itself. Remember, the universe writes its greatest stories not on the scrolls we fill with our wisdom, but on the chapters we leave blank enough to receive its truth. Chapter 5, The Farmer's Barren Field. In the fertile valley of the Euphrates, where grain once grew tall enough to brush the bellies of passing clouds, Timothy Garcia stood in the center of his empty field, trying to understand. For the 3rd season in a row, his carefully tended crops had withered before harvest, while neighboring fields flourished with golden abundance. Timothy had done everything right, following the sacred planting calendars, blessing his seeds in temple ceremonies, offering the finest grain to the gods of soil and sky. He'd even traded his prized ox for rare fertility crystals from distant mountains. Yet still his field remained stubbornly barren, as if the earth itself had forgotten how to give life. One morning, as he knelt in the dusty soil examining yet another lifeless seedling, he heard soft laughter. Looking up, he saw an old woman gathering herbs along his field's edge. Her basket was nearly empty, yet she moved with the satisfied air of someone carrying great treasure. "Grandmother," Timothy called out, "why do you laugh at my misfortune?" "Not at your misfortune, dear one," she replied, settling beside him. "I laugh because you remind me of a river that's forgotten it's already wet. Look how desperately you try to add water to water." She gestured toward his collection of farming tools, fertility crystals, and ritual objects. "You gather these things because you believe you're incomplete without them. But the universe withholds abundance precisely to show you that you already contain everything." She picked up a handful of barren soil, letting it sift through her fingers. "This empty field is not your failure. It's your teacher. In its barrenness, it asks, can you feel wealthy with nothing? Can you know your completeness even when all evidence suggests otherwise?" Timothy sat with her words as the sun traced its arc overhead. For the first time, he felt the peculiar fullness of his empty field, how it held not just the absence of crops, but the presence of infinite possibility. That evening, instead of performing his usual fertility rituals, Timothy simply walked his barren field, giving thanks for the space to learn, for the wisdom of emptiness, for the perfect completeness that required nothing to be added. The next season his field bloomed with such abundance that people traveled from distant cities to witness it. But by then, Timothy had learned that the crops were not his reward for finally doing things right. They were simply the natural overflow of his recognition that nothing had ever been missing. This is the divine paradox. The universe often withholds what we most desire until we realize we are already complete without it. True abundance flows not from filling our emptiness, but from discovering we were never empty. Practice. The gratitude ceremony. Stand in a space that feels lacking, whether physical or metaphorical. For each thing that appears to be missing, give thanks for the completeness that remains. Feel how scarcity itself becomes sacred when embraced as a teacher rather than fought as an enemy. Let emptiness reveal your inherent fullness. Remember, what the universe withholds with one hand, it offers wisdom with the other. Chapter 6. The Weaver's Broken Loom. In the mountain village of Phrygia, where threads were said to carry prayers to heaven, Michelle Anderson sat before the splintered remains of her ceremonial loom. For generations her family had woven the sacred harvest tapestries, magnificent works that captured sunlight in their threads and made the very air hum with possibility. But now, mere days before the autumn festival, her prized loom had collapsed in a spectacular cascade of cracking wood and snapping strings. The complex pattern she'd spent months preparing lay in tangled ruins at her feet. Michelle had always been known for her precise control, each thread placed with mathematical perfection, each color chosen through careful meditation. Other weavers marveled at her ability to plan elaborate designs that seemed to come alive in firelight, but as she stared at her broken loom, all that careful control felt like sand slipping through her fingers. That night, unable to sleep, she wandered to the village's sacred pool. There, in the reflected moonlight, she noticed a spider weaving its web. The creature worked with neither pattern nor plan, yet its creation held a geometric perfection that made Michelle's most careful designs seem clumsy in comparison. As she watched, a breeze disturbed the web. Instead of breaking, the silken threads danced with the wind, their very flexibility making them unbreakable. The spider didn't fight to maintain its design. It simply allowed the wind to become part of the creation. "Ah," came a voice, and Michelle turned to find an ancient shepherd watching the same scene. "You see it now? The spider doesn't weave. It surrenders to the weaving. Its art flows through it, not from it." Michelle returned to her workshop with new eyes. Instead of trying to salvage her original design, she gathered the broken threads and began to work without plan or purpose. Her hands moved of their own accord, surrendering to something deeper than conscious control. When the harvest festival arrived, Michelle unveiled a tapestry unlike any ever seen. Viewers swore they could see different patterns each time they looked. Here a field of wheat dancing in wind, there a flock of birds wheeling through clouds. The work seemed alive, as if it were still being woven by invisible hands. This is the secret of true creation. We are not the weavers of life's tapestry. We are the threads. Our greatest works emerge not from rigid control, but from supple surrender to the pattern that wants to emerge through us. Practice the thread meditation. Hold something you're trying to create or manifest. Now imagine yourself not as the creator, but as a thread in its weaving. Feel the difference between forcing a pattern and allowing yourself to be woven. For 3 breaths, surrender completely to the design that wants to emerge through you. Remember, The universe's greatest patterns flow through the hands that forget their weaving. Chapter 7, The Messenger's Lost Voice. In the sacred city of Memphis, where messages from the gods traveled on the breath of chosen speakers, Daniel Phillips was renowned as the Pharaoh's most trusted messenger. His voice could carry truth across crowded marketplaces and whisper secrets that would change empires. Each word he spoke seemed blessed by Thoth himself, landing with the weight of divine authority. On the eve of delivering the Pharaoh's most crucial proclamation, one that would unite Upper and Lower Egypt, Daniel awoke to find his voice completely gone. No sound emerged from his throat, not even a whisper. The court physicians applied their most potent remedies. Priests conducted elaborate ceremonies, but his voice remained sealed in silence. As temple bells announced the hour of proclamation, Daniel knelt in despair before the statue of Thoth. But rather than pray for his voice to return, he found himself sinking deeper into the silence that had claimed him. In that profound stillness, he began to notice how the temple walls vibrated with unspoken truths, how the air itself carried messages more pure than words could capture. An old temple cat brushed against his leg, and Daniel observed how it communicated everything: love, hunger, wisdom, without a single sound. The creature's very presence spoke volumes, its being more eloquent than any crafted speech. Rising with new understanding, Daniel entered the Pharaoh's court. Instead of attempting to force words, he simply stood in complete presence, embodying the message he had been meant to deliver. The court fell silent, caught in the power of his wordless communication. In that pregnant silence, the truth that needed to be shared emerged not through speech, but through pure transmission, heart to heart, soul to soul. Those present would later swear they had heard the most beautiful oration of their lives, though no physical sound had been made. The Pharaoh, moved to tears, declared, "Never has my message been delivered with such clarity, for words can hide truth, but silence reveals it." This is the deeper wisdom. The universe speaks most clearly through our silence. When we cease filling the air with words, we become pure channels for truth to express itself. Practice the silent transmission. Choose a truth you wish to communicate. Instead of forming it into words, let it fill your entire being. For 7 breaths, simply hold this truth in your presence. Notice how it radiates from you without any need for expression. Feel how silence carries what words cannot touch. Remember, the most powerful messages aren't spoken by us, but through us, in the eloquent silence of our surrendered presence. Chapter 8, The Sailor's Compass. In the great port city of Phoenicia, where merchant ships carried spices and wisdom across the known world, Stephanie Turner stood at her vessel's helm, watching her prize compass spin in endless circles. For 20 years she had navigated the treacherous waters between distant shores, earning renown as a captain who could find safe passage through any storm. But on this moonless night, with storm clouds gathering like hungry wolves above her ship, her compass, crafted by the finest artisans of Alexandria, refused to find true north. The needle whirled as if drunk on the wine of chaos, offering no guidance as thunder rolled across black waters. Her crew watched anxiously as waves grew to mountainous heights. They had always relied on Stephanie's uncanny ability to read the sea's moods, but now she stood motionless, transfixed by the useless compass. Suddenly, a glowing figure appeared at the ship's bow, a phosphorescent dolphin, its body trailing streams of living light. As Stephanie watched, the creature began to dance through the waves, weaving patterns that seemed to speak in a language older than words. "Ah," she whispered, understanding. dawning like sunrise in her heart. The compass spins because I've been seeking guidance from the tool rather than the tide. She closed her eyes, feeling the ship's subtle movements beneath her feet. In that moment of surrender, she became aware of invisible currents flowing beneath the chaos of surface waves, ancient rivers of energy that had guided vessels since the first reed boat touched water. Without consulting her compass, Stephanie began to steer, allowing her ship to become one with these deeper flows. The crew watched in amazement as their vessel found passage through the storm's heart, guided by something more trustworthy than any magnetic needle. When they reached harbor, sailors from other ships asked what charts she had followed through the tempest. Stephanie simply smiled and showed them her still spinning compass. "The truest navigation," she said, "comes when we stop trying to force our way and instead learn to read the invisible writing of the universe. Now, this is the eternal truth. The universe provides perfect guidance in every moment, but it speaks in the language of presence rather than planning. When our familiar tools fail us, it's an invitation to navigate by deeper wisdom. Practice the current meditation. Stand quietly and imagine yourself as a ship on life's vast ocean. Notice the subtle currents moving beneath your thoughts, the invisible flows of universal guidance. For 9 breaths, practice surrendering to these currents. Feel how different this is from following external directions. Remember, when all compasses spin, the heart becomes true north. Chapter 8, The Sailor's Compass. In the great port city of Phoenicia, where merchant ships carried spices and wisdom across the known world, Stephanie Turner stood at her vessel's helm, watching her prized compass spin in endless circles. For 20 years, she had navigated the treacherous waters between distant shores, earning renown as a captain who could find safe passage through any storm. But on this moonless night, with storm clouds gathering like hungry wolves above her ship, her compass, crafted by the finest artisans of Alexandria, refused to find true north. The needle whirled as if drunk on the wine of chaos, offering no guidance as thunder rolled across black waters. Her crew watched anxiously as waves grew to mountainous heights. They had always relied on Stephanie's uncanny ability to read the sea's moods, but now she stood motionless, transfixed by the useless compass. Suddenly a glowing figure appeared at the ship's bow, a phosphorescent dolphin, its body trailing streams of living light. As Stephanie watched, the creature began to dance through the waves, weaving patterns that seemed to speak in a language older than words. "Ah," she whispered, understanding dawning like sunrise in her heart. "The compass spins because I've been seeking guidance from the tool rather than the tide." She closed her eyes, feeling the ship's subtle movements beneath her feet. In that moment of surrender, she became aware of invisible currents flowing beneath the chaos of surface waves, ancient rivers of energy that had guided vessels since the first reed boat touched water. Without consulting her compass, Stephanie began to steer, allowing her ship to become one with these deeper flows. The crew watched in amazement as their vessel found passage through the storm's heart, guided by something more trustworthy than any magnetic needle. When they reached harbor, sailors from other ships asked what charts she had followed through the tempest. Stephanie simply smiled and showed them her still spinning compass. "The truest navigation," she said, "comes when we stop trying to force our way and instead learn to read the invisible writing of the universe. This is the eternal truth. The universe provides perfect guidance in every moment, but it speaks in the language of presence rather than planning. When our familiar tools fail us, It's an invitation to navigate by deeper wisdom. Practice the current meditation. Stand quietly and imagine yourself as a ship on life's vast ocean. Notice the subtle currents moving beneath your thoughts, the invisible flows of universal guidance. For 9 breaths, practice surrendering to these currents. Feel how different this is from following external directions. Remember, when all compasses spin, the heart becomes true north. Chapter 9. The Blacksmith's Cold Forge. In the iron city of Anatolia, where the ring of hammers sang prayers to Hephaestus, Aaron Mitchell's forge had gone cold. For 3 days, despite perfect kindling and the finest charcoal, no flame would take root in his sacred hearth. Aaron, whose blades were said to sing in battle and whose ceremonial cups held mysteries in their metal, found himself standing before a dark and silent forge. He had tried everything, rare oils, blessed bellows, even sacrificial offerings, but each attempt at ignition died before the first spark could catch. His apprentices whispered that the gods had withdrawn their favor, while waiting customers grew impatient for their commissioned works. On the 3rd night, as Aaron sat in darkness before his cold forge, an old wanderer appeared. The stranger's eyes reflected starlight as he examined the lifeless hearth. "I see you are a maker," the wanderer said, "but do you know how to be made?" Before Aaron could answer, the stranger picked up a piece of raw iron ore. "This stone does not try to become metal. It surrenders to the fire's transformation. Yet you, Master Smith, keep trying to force the flame." Aaron watched as the wanderer placed the ore in the cold forge. "Sometimes," the stranger continued, "the universe requires us to be the metal, not the hammer, to be worked upon rather than to work." Understanding struck Aaron like a hammer blow. All his life he had seen himself as the shaper, the creator, the one who imposed form upon formless metal. But now, sitting before his cold forge, he finally felt what the iron felt, the quiet patience of waiting to be transformed. As this awareness filled him, heat began to gather in the forge, not from any external fire, but seeming to rise from the very stones themselves. The ore in the hearth began to glow, though no flame touched it. Aaron watched in wonder as the metal softened and flowed of its own accord, taking shapes more perfect than any he had ever hammered. From that day forward, Aaron worked differently. Rather than forcing the metal to his will, he learned to listen for the forms waiting to emerge. His forge became known not just for its creations, but for its strange silences. Periods when the master smith would simply sit, waiting for the right moment when the universe itself would guide his hands. This is the deeper truth. Sometimes our greatest work comes not from our effort, but from our willingness to be worked upon. The universe seeks to shape us as surely as any smith shapes metal. Practice the unformed metal. Sit quietly and imagine yourself as raw ore in the cosmic forge. For 7 breaths, release all effort to become anything. Feel the difference between trying to transform yourself and allowing yourself to be transformed. Notice how universal forces are already shaping you, requiring only your surrender to their perfect timing. Remember, the master craftsman knows when to put down their tools and become the material itself. Chapter 10. The Dancer's Frozen Grace. In the temple gardens of ancient Heliopolis, where sacred dances wove invisible threads between earth and sky, Kimberly Scott was known as the embodiment of divine movement. Her dancing told stories that words could not express, each gesture a bridge between mortal and immortal realms. On the night of the Great Fertility Festival, as thousands gathered to witness the ceremonial dance that would awaken spring's dormant powers, Kimberly stood poised to begin. The first notes of sacred drums filled the air, but her body remained motionless as if carved from stone. Panic rose in her throat as she tried to force movement, yet every attempt left her more deeply frozen. The watching crowd began to murmur, and sweat beaded on her forehead as she stood paralyzed before their expectant gazes. In her desperation, she noticed a lotus floating in the temple pool. Though seemingly still, the flower made tiny adjustments to maintain its perfect balance on the water's surface. Its stillness was not the absence of movement, but movement so refined it became invisible. As this realization dawned, Kimberly felt a profound shift. Instead of fighting her stillness, she surrendered to it completely. In that surrender, she discovered that stillness itself was dancing. Her heartbeat, her breath, or the subtle play of energy through her motionless form. The watching crowd fell silent, transfixed. Though Kimberly hadn't moved an inch, they began to see ripples of movement in the space around her. Some would later swear they witnessed butterflies emerging from her fingertips, while others described waves of light flowing from her still form. An ancient priestess approached afterward and bowed deeply. "In perfect stillness," she whispered, "you have danced the oldest dance of all, the dance of being itself." From that night forward, Kimberly's dancing changed. Between each movement, she would find moments of absolute stillness, letting the dance emerge from silence rather than being imposed upon it. These pauses became as powerful as her most dramatic gestures, pregnant with infinite potential. This is the eternal wisdom. All movement arises from stillness, just as all sounds emerge from silence. When we resist our moments of immobility, we miss the subtle dance of existence itself. Practice the unmoving dance. Stand in perfect stillness for the length of 7 breaths. Rather than forcing yourself to freeze, settle into stillness as you would settle into warm water. Notice the tiny movements that continue: breath, pulse, the play of energy through your body. Feel how stillness is not the opposite of movement, but its source. Remember, the universe's greatest dance is the eternal play between stillness and motion, each giving birth to the other in an endless cycle of creation. Part 2, The Power of the Paradox. Chapter 11, The Judge's Impossible Verdict. In the mountain city of Persepolis, where justice flowed like the sacred rivers dividing the land, Judge Ryan Campbell faced an impossible choice. 2 farmers claimed the same fertile valley, each holding scrolls bearing the royal seal, each declaring them the rightful owner. The first farmer had nurtured the soil for 20 seasons, his family's blood and sweat mixing with the earth. The second had received the land as payment for saving the previous king's life, his claim sealed by divine right. Both men spoke truth. Both deserved justice. For 7 days, Ryan sat in the temple of balanced scales, seeking wisdom. He consulted ancient texts, prayed to the gods of justice, yet found no answer that didn't tear truth in half. On the 8th morning, as dawn painted the temple walls with golden light, Ryan watched 2 sparrows fighting over a single seed. Suddenly, a 3rd sparrow swooped down, catching the disputed seed in midair. In that moment, the fighting birds united, working together to chase the intruder. Ryan's eyes widened as understanding struck like summer lightning. He had been trying to choose between opposing truths when justice called for transcending the division itself. He gathered the farmers at sunset. Instead of declaring a winner, he spoke. The land itself rejects division. One of you has given it your labor, the other holds its blessing. Apart, you each own half a truth. Together you could share a whole one, Dorney. He decreed that the land would belong to both. The first farmer's family would work the soil, while the seconds would manage its distribution. Their profits and responsibilities would be shared, their fates intertwined like roots of ancient trees. Initially, both men protested, but as seasons passed, their partnership bore fruit sweeter than either could have grown alone. Their valley became known as the Garden of Twin Truths, where opposition bloomed into unity. This is the deeper wisdom. The universe's justice operates beyond the duality of right and wrong. When we transcend the illusion of opposing forces, we discover that what seems contradictory at one level becomes complementary at a higher one. Practice the paradox bridge. Sit quietly and bring to mind two opposing truths in your life, situations where both sides seem right. For 12 breaths, instead of trying to choose between them, imagine them as two pillars supporting a greater truth. Feel how opposition dissolves when viewed from a higher perspective. Remember, true justice doesn't choose between different truths. It reveals how they were one truth all along. Chapter 12, The Midwife's Backward Birth. In the misty valleys of ancient Kerala, where life's first cry echoed through sacred bamboo groves, Tiffany Nelson was known as the midwife who could ease any birth. Her hands held the wisdom of 1,000 deliveries, each child entering the world through her gentle guidance. But on the night of the blood moon, when the chief's daughter went into labor, everything went wrong. The baby, stubbornly refusing nature's ancient choreography, had turned completely backward. Hours passed as Tiffany tried every technique handed down through generations of midwives, yet the child remained unmoved. The mother's strength was fading like evening light. Whispers of ill omens spread through the gathering crowd outside the birthing hut. Tiffany's reputation, built over decades, seemed ready to shatter like a clay pot in storm winds. In her moment of deepest despair, she noticed a butterfly emerging from its chrysalis. But unlike any emergence she'd witnessed before, this one was breaking through the bottom of its cocoon. The sight stopped her trembling hands. "Perhaps," she whispered, "the universe sometimes demands a different kind of birth." Instead of fighting the baby's unusual position, Tiffany began working with it. Rather than trying to turn the child, she adapted her techniques to support its chosen path. As she surrendered to this inverse approach, the mother's body seemed to relax in recognition. What followed was unlike any birth she'd attended. The child entered the world facing the stars instead of the earth, eyes wide open as if already witnessing mysteries. The attending women gasped, not in fear, but in wonder. This backward birth had produced something extraordinary. Twins, the second child hidden behind the first, emerging perfectly after its sibling blazed an unexpected trail. From that night forward, Tiffany approached each birth differently. She learned to read not just the signs she'd been taught, but to watch for how life might choose to surprise her. Her birthing hut became known as the place of unexpected blessings, where even the most challenging beginnings could unfold into double gifts. This is the eternal truth. The universe's greatest blessings often arrive through the door we tried hardest to close. What appears as obstacle becomes opportunity when we cease insisting life follow our map. Practice the inverse opening. Sit quietly and recall a situation that seems to be going wrong. For 9 breaths, imagine this apparent wrongness as a mysterious rightness trying to birth itself through an unexpected channel. Feel how resistance transforms into curiosity when you allow life to surprise you with its wisdom. Remember, sometimes the most perfect path is the one that seems perfectly wrong until its hidden purpose is revealed. Chapter 13, The Librarians Burning Books. In the labyrinthine depths of Alexandria's great library, where scrolls whispered ancient secrets in the flickering lamplight, Jeremy Edwards guarded humanity's collected wisdom. His fingers knew every papyrus, every clay tablet, every carefully preserved fragment of knowledge gathered from across the known world. One fateful night, as desert winds howled through the city streets, Jeremy woke to the acrid smell of smoke. Flames had already claimed the library's western wing, hungry tongues of fire devouring centuries of written wisdom. He watched in horror as mathematical theorems, astronomical charts, and philosophical treatises crumbled into ash. Desperate to save something, anything, Jeremy rushed toward the burning shelves, but as he reached for a precious scroll, a falling beam blocked his path. Forced to retreat, he collapsed on the marble steps outside, tears streaming down his face as he witnessed humanity's knowledge seemingly vanishing into the night sky. As dawn painted the smoke-filled horizon, Jeremy noticed something peculiar. Despite their loss, scholars who gathered at the ruins began sharing from memory the texts they'd studied. But these recitations were different. Not mere repetitions, but living wisdom flowing through the spaces between their words. Each telling was unique, yet carried the same essential truth. A weathered philosopher approached Jeremy, placing a gnarled hand on his shoulder. "See how the fire has freed knowledge from its paper prison?" he asked. "True wisdom was never in the ink or papyrus. It lives in the gap between thought and expression, between reader and text. It cannot burn because it was never contained in what was burning." As days passed, Jeremy observed how the destruction had transformed the library's purpose. What had been a vault of fixed words became a flowing river of living wisdom. Scholars who once argued over exact translations now shared stories that evolved with each telling. The library's walls had burned, but its heart beat stronger than ever. In time, Jeremy understood. Written words were like fingers pointing at the moon, useful guides, but not the moon itself. True knowledge resided in the silent space between thoughts, in the pregnant pause between speaking and hearing, in the eternal gap where wisdom dances freely. This is the deeper truth. No fire can destroy what was never contained. Real wisdom lives not in what we grasp, but in what grasps us when we release our hold on its forms. Practice the wisdom gap. Sit quietly and recall a teaching that moved you deeply. Now, instead of remembering the exact words, sink into the space where those words first landed in your heart. For 11 breaths, rest in that gap between knowledge and knowing. Feel how wisdom lives not in mental content, but in the space that holds all content. Remember, the universe's greatest library exists in the silence between your thoughts, where wisdom waits eternally, indestructible, and ever new. Before we get into the next chapter, you can download a free ebook version of this audiobook using the link in the pinned comment below this video. Chapter 14, The Shepherd's Scattered Flock. In the windswept highlands of ancient Anatolia, where shepherds' paths wound between peaks that pierced the clouds, Michael Torres tended the largest flock in 7 valleys. His sheep were his world, each one known by name, each bell's tone as familiar as his own heartbeat. One autumn night, as storm clouds gathered thick as wool, Michael dreamed of a white wolf dancing in moonlight. He woke to an impossible silence. No bleating, no bells, no shuffling hooves. His entire flock had vanished, leaving only scattered tufts of wool like morning mist between the rocks. For 3 days, Michael searched the mountains, calling until his voice became as rough as the stone beneath his feet. On the 4th day, exhausted and empty-handed, he collapsed beside an ancient olive tree. As he sat in his loss, something strange began to happen. He noticed sounds he'd never heard before, the whispered secrets of wind through grass, the subtle symphony of insects in morning light, the quiet wisdom of clouds reshaping themselves against blue sky. His heart, no longer filled with concern for hundreds of sheep, began to expand like a valley after winter floods. A tiny lamb, separated from its mother, stumbled into his camp that evening. Instead of seeing one lost sheep, Michael saw infinite possibility in its solitary presence. He cared for it with a depth of attention he could never have offered when surrounded by hundreds. As days passed, other shepherds' lost sheep began finding their way to him. Each arrived precisely when he had space to receive it fully. His flock rebuilt itself slowly, but differently, not through his gathering, but through the universe's perfect timing. When the white wolf finally appeared at his fire one night, Michael understood. "You didn't take my flock," he said softly. "You took my limitations." The wolf's eyes reflected starlight as it dissolved into the darkness. This is the eternal truth. What appears as loss is often the universe creating space for greater abundance. But this abundance can only flow into a vessel that has been emptied, a heart that has learned to hold nothing so it might receive everything. Practice the sacred emptying. Sit quietly and recall something you've lost. For 7 breaths, instead of feeling the absence, feel the spaciousness that loss created. Notice how emptiness itself has a presence, a pregnant potential, waiting to be filled in ways you couldn't imagine while full. Remember, the universe never takes without preparing to give. Your capacity to receive expands precisely through the spaces life hollows within you. Chapter 15. The Perfumer's Spoiled Oils. In the aromatic gardens of ancient Damascus, where rose petals carpeted morning dew and jasmine perfumed evening prayers, Brittany Parker crafted scents that could capture memories of paradise. Her delicate vials contained essences so pure they were said to make angels pause in their celestial dance. When the Sultan commissioned her to create the royal wedding perfume, a blend to mark the union of his daughter with the Persian prince, Brittany gathered her rarest oils. For 30 days, she distilled precious resins, aged ambergris, and flowers picked only by moonlight. But on the morning of the wedding, as she opened her specialized cedar chest, a horrifying truth struck her nostrils. Every oil had transformed overnight, their divine fragrances twisted into something earthier, darker, almost feral. What should have smelled of heaven now carried notes of deep soil and wild forests. Panic seized her heart as wedding guests began arriving. There was no time to begin anew. As she slumped against her workbench, a strange beetle walked across her spoiled oils, leaving tiny footprints that seemed to glow with an inner light. "Even rot," whispered an ancient voice in her memory, "is but transformation in disguise." Instead of fighting the changed scents, Brittany began working with them. She listened to what they had become, rather than mourning what they were meant to be. The earthen notes spoke of passion's depths, the wild traces whispered of untamed hearts, the feral undertones sang of love's primitive power. When she finally presented her creation to the Sultan's daughter, The young bride inhaled deeply, and tears of joy fell from her eyes. "This," she declared, "is not the scent of a perfect union, but of a real one. It speaks of love that grows even through darkness, of beauty that transforms rather than fades." The perfume became legendary, but not for its flawlessness. It was sought after because it reminded every wearer that imperfection itself is the perfect expression of life's endless becoming. This is the eternal truth. The universe's perfection expresses itself precisely through what we perceive as flaws. When we align with what is, rather than what should be, we discover that everything is already in its right fragrance. Practice the essence acceptance. Sit quietly and bring to mind something you consider spoiled or imperfect. For 7 breaths, inhale deeply, as if drawing in its scent. Rather than trying to fix or change it, explore its actual essence. What truth does this apparent imperfection express? What deeper perfection lives within its seeming flaw? Remember, in the universe's infinite alchemy, even spoiled oils carry messages of perfect wisdom, if only we have the courage to inhale deeply enough to receive their truth. Chapter 16, The Astrologer's Dark Sky. In the sacred observatory of ancient Chaldea, where celestial mysteries revealed themselves to patient eyes, Matthew Reed served as the king's personal astrologer. His calculations were so precise that merchants would delay voyages and generals would postpone battles until he declared the heavens favorable. On the eve of the kingdom's most crucial decision, whether to forge an alliance with a powerful Eastern empire, the king demanded an immediate reading. But as Matthew climbed the tower steps that night, an unprecedented darkness greeted him. Thick clouds had swallowed every star, leaving the sky an impenetrable void. For hours, Matthew paced the circular chamber, praying for even the smallest break in the clouds. The king's guards waited below, their torches casting restless shadows. As dawn approached with no change, Matthew felt the weight of the kingdom's fate pressing upon his shoulders, and in his despair, he noticed something peculiar. The observatory's polished bronze mirrors, usually used for tracking stellar movements, were reflecting the torch flames in an intricate dance. The longer he watched their hypnotic movement, the more he realized, even without stars, patterns were still speaking. A strange calm settled over him as he understood. The universe's guidance wasn't limited to distant lights. Every moment contained complete wisdom, if only we were present enough to perceive it. The clouded sky wasn't an obstacle. It was the message itself. When finally brought before the king, Matthew spoke with unexpected clarity. "The heavens have hidden themselves not to deny us wisdom, but to teach us to trust what's right before us. Just as clouds don't negate the star's existence, uncertainty doesn't negate our inner knowing." The king, struck by these words, spent the day observing his own kingdom rather than worrying about distant empires. He noticed subtle signs that had been there all along: the contentment of his people, the strength of existing traditions, the beauty of independence. The alliance was politely declined, and history would prove this choice most wise. This is the eternal truth. Clarity doesn't come from searching the heavens for answers, but from complete presence with what is. The universe speaks not only through celestial signs, but through the profound simplicity of the present moment. Practice the immediate oracle. Sit quietly and close your eyes for 9 breaths instead of seeking guidance from above or beyond. Sink fully into this exact moment. Notice how wisdom exists in the simple fact of your existence, in the rhythm of your breath, in the aliveness of your being. Let each inhale reveal what is already known. Each exhale surrender what need not be figured out. Remember, the clearest guidance comes not from reading distant signs, but from trusting the wisdom that exists in the eternal now. Chapter 17. The Baker's Sunken Bread. In the sacred city of Heliopolis, where temple ovens burned day and night to feed both gods and mortals, Nicole Foster prepared the holy bread that sustained the eternal flame keepers. Her loaves were known to rise like the sun itself, golden and perfect, bringing sustenance to body and soul alike. As the great festival of Osiris approached, Nicole began preparing the sacred bread that would feed thousands of pilgrims. But something strange occurred. Despite her decades of expertise, every batch refused to rise. The dough remained stubbornly dense, as if the very air within it had been claimed by some unseen force. She tried everything: fresh yeast from the temple gardens, grain blessed by high priests, water drawn from sacred wells. Still, each loaf emerged from the ovens flat and heavy as a temple stone. The festival was mere hours away, and panic began to knead itself into her heart. In desperation, Nicole went to meditate in the grain storage room. As she sat among the barrels of wheat, she noticed how the empty vessels created hollow sounds when the wind blew across their openings. Each void space sang its own unique note, creating an ethereal symphony. Watching a spider weave its web between empty jars, she suddenly understood. The hollow spaces weren't empty. They were vessels for whatever needed to flow through them. Her attempts to force the bread to rise were like trying to command the wind to sing. Returning to her ovens, Nicole approached her work differently. Instead of trying to make the bread rise, she simply created space for it to become what it needed to be. To her amazement, the dense loaves, when broken, revealed patterns like ancient hieroglyphs. When eaten, they filled pilgrims with an unexpected sustenance, not the familiar lightness of risen bread, but a grounding force that connected them to earth's deep wisdom. The festival became known as the Feast of Stone Bread, where seekers learned that nourishment flows not from what we fill ourselves with, but from our willingness to become empty vessels for divine sustenance. This is the eternal truth. When we stop trying to rise above our nature and instead allow ourselves to be hollow instruments, the universe fills us with exactly what is needed. Practice the vessel's song. Sit quietly and imagine yourself as an empty vessel. For 7 breaths, release all effort to be full or perfect. Notice how your hollow spaces create their own music when life flows through them. What wishes to be expressed through your emptiness? What songs does the universe sing through your void? Remember, true nourishment comes not from what we accomplish, but from how completely we allow ourselves to be used by the greater forces that wish to flow through us. Chapter 18. The Miner's Collapsed Tunnel. In the emerald mines of ancient Nubia, where precious stones whispered secrets from the earth's depths, Stephen Morris was known as the finder of hidden treasures. His uncanny ability to sense where veins of precious stones lay beneath the rock had made him legendary among the mining guilds. For 7 years, Stephen had been pursuing what he called the Mother Vein, a mythical deposit said to contain emeralds of such clarity they could reveal the thoughts of gods. Each day he ventured deeper into the labyrinthine tunnels, following traces of crystal that glowed like frozen starlight. One morning, as he finally glimpsed a glimmer that could only be the Mother Vein, the earth itself seemed to exhale. The tunnel walls shuddered, and before he could move, darkness consumed him. When consciousness returned, Stephen found himself trapped in a pocket of air, surrounded by fallen rock, with no way forward or back. For 3 days he sat in perfect darkness. His mining tools lay useless beside him. His hands, which had always grasped and searched and dug, could do nothing but rest in his lap. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he began to notice something extraordinary, tiny points of light emerging from the very rocks that imprisoned him. These weren't the familiar glints of emerald, but something far more subtle, like droplets of moonlight seeping through stone. The longer he sat in stillness, the more these lights revealed themselves, until the chamber glowed with a radiance he had never seen in all his years of searching. When rescuers finally broke through to him, they found Stephen sitting peacefully, surrounded by ordinary rocks that somehow caught and transformed light in impossible ways. He emerged carrying nothing, yet those who looked in his eyes saw something more precious than any emerald. "I spent my life forcing the earth to reveal its treasures," he later told his apprentices. "Only when I could no longer dig did I discover that the greatest gems reveal themselves to those who learn to sit in stillness." This is the eternal truth. The universe's most precious gifts cannot be extracted through effort. They emerge naturally when we surrender our need to discover and allow ourselves to be discovered. Practice the jewel of being. Sit in complete stillness for 11 breaths. Release all effort to find, achieve, or understand anything. Notice how, when you stop searching, subtle treasures begin revealing themselves, not as things to be grasped, but as natural radiance, emerging from the depths of your own being. Remember, what you seek has been seeking you, waiting patiently for you to become still enough to be found. Chapter 19, The Storyteller's Forgotten Tale. In the sacred city of where tales wove the fabric of reality itself, Heather Cox was known as the keeper of ancient stories. Her words could make the stars dance and the desert bloom, for she knew the secret language that spoke creation into being. Each full moon, thousands gathered in the Temple of Tales to hear her give voice to the eternal stories. But on the night of the great eclipse, when she arose to tell the most sacred tale of all, something unprecedented occurred. Her mind became as blank as an unwritten tablet. Before the assembled crowd, Heather stood frozen, her tongue heavy as stone. The ancient words that had flowed through her for decades had vanished like morning mist. The silence grew thick as honey, and worried whispers rippled through the gathering. In her desperate stillness, Heather noticed something peculiar. An old woman in the front row had tears streaming down her face, though no tale had yet been told. A child's eyes shone with wonder, though no words had been spoken. The temple cats had arranged themselves in a perfect circle, purring in harmony with her thundering heart. Then she understood. The story was already telling itself. Her silence had created space for each person to become both storyteller and tale. The temple itself was breathing narrative into being. Every crack in the ancient walls held chapters of wisdom. Every shadow contained epics of transformation. When Heather finally spoke, she said simply, "Tonight we are all the story." And somehow, in that moment, each person felt their own life weaving into a grand tapestry of meaning. Merchants recognized the hero's journey in their daily trades. Mothers saw the great mysteries reflected in their children's eyes. Beggars understood themselves as disguised kings. The eclipse ended, but the temple remained changed. People spoke of it as the night of living stories, when tales broke free from words and danced through human hearts instead. This is the eternal truth. The most powerful stories are not told, but lived. Each breath is a sentence in the universe's endless narrative, each moment a chapter waiting to be embodied rather than spoken. Practice. The living tale. For 13 breaths, release all need to narrate your experience. Instead, become the story itself. Feel how your heartbeat writes rhythm, how your cells sing verses, how your very presence tells tales no words could capture. Notice how the universe is already telling your story through the simple fact of your existence. Remember, you are not the teller of the tale, but the tale itself being told through the grand mystery of existence. Chapter 20, The Musician's Broken Strings. In the moonlit temple of Delphi, where Apollo's sacred harmonies danced between marble columns, Joshua Allen was revered as the master of the seven-stringed lyre. His music could calm storms, heal the sick, and some whispered even open doorways between worlds. On the night of the great celestial alignment, when 7 planets formed the sacred heptagon in the heavens, Joshua was to perform the hymn of universal harmony, a piece played once every 1,000 years to maintain the cosmic order itself. As he struck the first note, something unprecedented occurred. All 7 strings of his sacred lyre snapped simultaneously, their breaking sounds echoing through the temple like 7 sighs of liberation. Horror rippled through the gathered crowd. Without the hymn, would chaos descend upon creation? But in that moment of catastrophe, Joshua noticed something extraordinary. The broken strings, in their final release of tension, had created a haunting chord that still hung in the air. And in the silence that followed, he began to hear something even more remarkable. The space between sounds was filled with its own music. The marble columns rang with subtle vibrations. The breath of the assembled crowd formed intricate rhythms. Even the starlight filtering through the temple roof created delicate harmonies as it touched the broken strings. The very absence of the expected music had revealed a deeper symphony that had always been playing beneath the surface of silence. Joshua raised his hands not to play, but to conduct the grand orchestra of empty space. The audience gasped as they began to hear it too, the music of existence itself, the song that needs no instruments to be heard. That night became known as the performance of the void, where the breaking of strings revealed the eternal symphony that flows through all things. This is the eternal truth. What we consider to be music, organized sound, is merely a boat upon the vast ocean of silence. True harmony exists not in the notes we play, but in the infinite space that allows all sounds to be. Practice the symphony of space, and for 7 breaths become utterly still. Listen not for sounds, but for the living silence that contains all sound. Notice how each thought, each heartbeat, each breath is like a note floating in an infinite orchestra of space. Feel how the emptiness itself vibrates with its own mysterious music. Remember, the deepest harmonies are heard not through the strings we play, but through our willingness to become the silent space where all music dwells. Part 3, The Return to Original Knowing. Chapter 21, The Alchemist's Failed Gold. In the shadowed laboratories of ancient Alexandria, where mystery schools guarded secrets of transformation, Kevin Hayes was known as the most dedicated seeker of the Philosopher's Stone. For 23 years, he had labored over bubbling crucibles and sacred geometries, pursuing the ultimate transmutation of lead into gold. His workshop walls were covered with thousands of failed formulas. Each morning, he would begin again, combining subtle essences and celestial timing with unwavering precision. Yet every attempt produced only darker, more stubborn lead. One evening, exhausted from another failed transformation, Kevin noticed something peculiar about his latest failure. The lead ingot, though resolutely not gold, caught the setting sun in a way that made it shimmer with colors he had never seen in any metal. Depths of purple, flashes of green, hints of something beyond ordinary sight. Fascinated, he began studying his lead specimens not as problems to be solved, but as mysteries to be witnessed. He noticed how each piece held its own unique patterns, like frozen stories of creation. The very density that had frustrated him now revealed itself as a kind of profound completeness. During one pre-dawn meditation, as he held a piece of lead in the violet hour between night and day, Kevin experienced something extraordinary. The metal in his hands didn't change. Rather, his perception transformed. He saw that the lead had always been perfect, complete in its leaden nature. Its very leadness was as essential to the universe as the goldness of gold. In that moment, every failed experiment in his laboratory began to glow with its own inner light. The lead had never needed to become gold. It had been waiting for him to recognize its inherent perfection. Word spread of the alchemist who could reveal the hidden radiance in common metals. Seekers came from distant lands, expecting transformation formulas. Instead, Kevin would place a piece of lead in their hands and teach them to see what was already there. This is the eternal truth. The universe's greatest alchemy happens not through changing what is, but through transforming how we see. Everything already contains the light of perfection. We need only develop the eyes to recognize it. Practice. The leaden light. Take something you consider ordinary or imperfect. For 17 breaths, release all desire to change or improve it. Instead, witness it with completely fresh eyes, as if seeing it for the first time. Notice how its very nature, exactly as it is, contains its own form of perfection. Remember, true transmutation is not about turning lead into gold, but about recognizing that lead itself is a perfect expression of the divine. Chapter 22. The Oracle's Silent Vision. In the mist-shrouded temple of Eleusis, where veils between worlds grew thin, Rachel Morgan served as the Oracle of Dawn. Kings and peasants alike sought her prophecies, for it was said her words could part the curtains of time itself. Each morning she would enter the sacred chamber as sunlight first touched the temple's eastern wall. There, amid sacred vapors and crystalline resonance, visions would flow through her like water through a clear vessel. But on the morning of the Great Conjunction, when 7 sacred stars aligned, something unprecedented occurred. The visions stopped completely. Rachel sat in the prophetic chamber, her mind as still as a midnight pool, but no glimpses of futures or pasts emerged. The temple guardians grew anxious as supplicants waited outside, including a desperate queen seeking guidance for her troubled realm. As the hours passed in profound silence, Rachel noticed something extraordinary. The empty space where visions usually danced began to reveal a different kind of knowing. She became acutely aware of each breath's journey through her body, every subtle shift of light on the temple walls, the precise texture of the stone beneath her feet. The present moment, usually overlooked in her pursuit of future sight, suddenly bloomed with infinite depth. She realized that each instant contained entire universes of wisdom, if only one became fully present to receive it. When the queen was finally admitted, Rachel didn't speak of futures or possibilities. Instead, she guided the monarch to join her in absolute presence. In that shared moment of complete awareness, the queen found all the answers she sought. Not in prophetic pronouncements, but in the profound clarity of undivided attention to what is. The temple's records speak of this as the day of immediate knowing, when the oracle taught that true wisdom lies not in seeing through time, but in seeing through the illusion that we are separate from this eternal moment. This is the timeless truth. The deepest prophecies are not about tomorrow, but about the infinite now. All possible futures and pasts collapse into the singular power of pure presence, where all knowledge already resides. Practice the eternal instant. For 9 breaths, release all thoughts of past and future. Become utterly present to this exact moment. Notice how each instant contains complete wisdom when witnessed with undivided attention. Feel how time itself dissolves in the infinity of now. Remember, the greatest visions come not from seeing beyond the present moment, but from seeing its limitless depth with perfect clarity. Chapter 23, The Warrior's Surrendered Sword. In the mist-veiled valleys of ancient Chang'an, where warfare had been elevated to sacred art, Brandon Cooper was known as the unconquerable blade. His sword techniques were said to flow like water, yet strike like lightning, and in 30 years of combat he had never known defeat. On the eve of the Empire's greatest battle, when 10,000 warriors gathered to face an invading force that darkened the horizon, Brandon encountered something that would transform the very meaning of victory. As he meditated in the Temple of Dawn, his cherished sword, said to be forged from a fallen star, suddenly felt unbearably heavy in his hands. Each attempt to lift the blade felt like trying to raise a mountain. Yet when he finally released his grip, allowing the sword to rest on the temple floor, an extraordinary lightness filled his being. In that moment of surrender, he experienced a profound revelation. True power lay not in opposing force with force, but in becoming so perfectly aligned with the flow of existence that resistance itself dissolved. The next morning, as armies assembled on the battlefield, Brandon did the unthinkable. Before both forces, he laid his legendary sword upon the earth and stood empty-handed in the space between armies. A strange stillness descended over the field as all watched this renowned warrior choose apparent defenselessness. But those closest to Brandon saw something remarkable. The very air around him seemed to bend, as if reality itself flowed around his unresisting presence. Arrows fired at him curved harmlessly away. Soldiers charging toward him found their paths inexplicably altered. The more he surrendered to what was, the more invincible he became. By day's end, not through combat but through complete alignment with the moment, Brandon had caused both armies to lay down their weapons. The battle was won without a single blow struck. This became known as the victory of empty hands. When the mightiest warrior discovered that true invincibility comes not from opposing the universe, but from becoming one with its flow. This is the eternal truth. The universe's power moves not through force, but through perfect alignment. When we surrender our weapons of resistance, we become channels for something far greater than mere victory. Practice the warrior's surrender. For 13 breaths, identify something you've been fighting or resisting. Now, instead of pushing against it, allow yourself to become completely aligned with what is. Notice how resistance dissolves, not through combat, but through perfect acceptance of the present moment. Remember, True power emerges not from conquering the universe, but from surrendering so completely that you become the space through which it flows. Chapter 24, The Philosopher's Unsolved Riddle. In the marble halls of ancient Athens, where wisdom seekers gathered to untangle the threads of existence, Amber Ellis was renowned for her ability to resolve the most baffling philosophical paradoxes. Her logical proofs were studied in every school of thought, and students traveled months just to hear her unravel life's deepest mysteries. One autumn morning, a peculiar scroll arrived from a distant temple. Upon it was inscribed a deceptively simple question: what exists in the space between thought and no thought? The more Amber attempted to answer, the more the question seemed to fold in upon itself like a serpent swallowing its own tail. For 40 days and nights she applied every tool of logic and reason. Her chambers became a labyrinth of partial answers and abandoned theories. Each solution seemed to birth 10 new contradictions, until her renowned clarity dissolved into a fog of impossibility. On the 41st night, exhausted from mental struggle, Amber walked to the temple gardens. There, beside a reflecting pool, she watched the interplay of moonlight and water. A lotus blossom floated on the surface, neither fully submerged nor completely above water. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Rather than trying to solve the riddle, she allowed herself to become the riddle. Her mind relaxed into the impossible space between knowing and not knowing, like the lotus suspended between water and air. Suddenly she understood. The answer lay not in resolution, but in embracing the mystery itself. The space between thought and no thought was precisely where the universe's deepest wisdom dwelled, accessible not through understanding but through surrendering to the unknowable. When students arrived the next morning, they found Amber sitting in silent contemplation. Instead of offering explanations, she guided each seeker to rest in the fertile void between questions and answers. Those who could embrace this sacred uncertainty discovered a deeper knowing beyond the reach of logic. This is the eternal truth. The universe's greatest mysteries are not meant to be solved, but to be lived within. True wisdom comes not from gathering answers, but from learning to dance with the questions themselves. Practice the paradox pool. For 11 breaths, bring to mind your most perplexing question. Rather than seeking answers, allow yourself to rest in the space of not knowing. Notice how this uncertainty itself becomes a form of profound wisdom, more vast than any answer could contain. Remember, the highest understanding comes not from resolving mysteries, but from allowing them to resolve us into something greater than we imagined possible. Chapter 25, The Gardener's Dying Seeds. In the hanging gardens of ancient Ur, where even the driest winds carried whispers of life, Jason Wheeler tended the sacred plants that fed the temple's holy ceremonies. His gardens were known throughout 7 kingdoms for their vitality, as if the very breath of creation flowed through his fingers into the soil. But as the great festival of renewal approached, something unprecedented occurred. Every seed Jason planted withered and died, turning to black dust despite his most careful ministrations. He tried all the ancient techniques, blessing the soil with moon-charged water, singing the traditional growing songs, even sacrificing his most precious oils to the earth spirits. Still, death claimed each seed before it could break through the soil. The temple priest grew concerned, for without the sacred plants, the renewal ceremonies could not proceed. Jason spent sleepless nights in his garden watching helplessly as life refused to emerge from the earth. On the 7th night of his vigil, exhausted and desperate, Jason noticed something extraordinary in the pattern of decay. The blackened remains of his seeds had formed perfect mandalas in the soil, like cosmic maps drawn in shadow. Looking closer, he saw tiny points of phosphorescence glowing within the decay, as if death itself contained hidden stars. Guided by an inner wisdom, Jason did something that defied all his training. He planted new seeds directly into the decomposed remains of the dead ones. What followed astonished even the eldest priests, and plants erupted from the soil with unprecedented vigor, growing to full maturity in days rather than weeks. Their flowers bore colors never before seen in any garden, and their sacred properties were magnified beyond measure. Jason had discovered what mystics had long whispered, that death is not the opposite of life, but its secret source. Like a cosmic womb, decay creates the very conditions necessary for greater existence to emerge. What appears as an ending is actually the birthplace of new beginnings. The festival that year was remembered for generations as those who partook of the garden's bounty experienced not just renewal, but complete transformation. The plants that grew from death's embrace carried something of the void's fertile mystery within them. This is the eternal truth. Everything that appears to die is actually being transformed into the seeds of its own rebirth. The universe's greatest acts of creation emerge from what seems like utter destruction. Practice the fertile void. For 7 breaths, bring awareness to something in your life that appears to be dying or ending. Instead of resisting this decay, imagine it as rich soil from which something unprecedented will grow. Feel how death and rebirth are one continuous movement in the cosmic dance. Remember, when all appears lost, you stand at the threshold of creation itself. Trust the darkness. It is heavy with unborn light. Chapter 26, The Priestess's Empty Altar. In the sacred temple of Heliopolis, where the veils between worlds were said to be thinnest, Samantha Rivera served as High Priestess of the Dawn Mysteries. For 30 years, she had maintained the golden altar that housed the divine presence, an altar so radiant that visitors claimed it held captured sunlight. On the morning of the Great Convergence, when thousands would gather for the once-in-a-lifetime celestial alignment, Samantha entered the inner sanctum to find the unthinkable, the altar, completely bare. The sacred objects accumulated over centuries had vanished without trace. No theft, no disturbance, as if the holy items had simply ceased to exist. Panic seized her heart as pilgrims began arriving for the ceremony. How could she reveal the divine presence without the sacred vessels, the ceremonial fires, the holy oils that had been used since time immemorial? The temple guardians whispered of omens and ill fortune. In her desperation, Samantha knelt before the empty altar, and for the first time in 3 decades, she prayed without intermediary objects. As her forehead touched the cool stone, something extraordinary occurred. Her body began to emit a subtle golden light, the same radiance that had once emanated from the altar's precious objects. With growing wonder, she realized that the altar had been stripped bare, not as punishment, but as initiation. The divine presence was not something to be contained in vessels, no matter how sacred. It was what they themselves were meant to become. When the pilgrims entered the temple, they found no golden artifacts upon the altar. Instead, they discovered Samantha herself had become the offering, her very presence radiating such profound sanctity that many fell to their knees in spontaneous devotion. The ceremony that followed was unlike any in living memory, as each participant discovered the sacred presence awakening within their own being. This is the eternal truth. The divine does not wish to be worshipped through objects, but to be embodied through presence. Every altar is eventually stripped bare so that we might discover the temple we already are. Practice the living altar. For 9 breaths, imagine yourself as an empty altar. Rather than placing anything upon it, allow your entire being to become the sacred vessel through which presence naturally radiates. Notice how divinity emerges, not from what you have, but from what you are. Remember, when all external forms fall away, what remains is the truth of your own radiant nature, waiting to be recognized. Chapter 27, The Navigator's Uncharted Waters. In the twilight harbors of ancient Phoenicia, where master navigators traced their routes by stars, David Kelly was known for mapping the most treacherous waters with uncanny precision. His charts were prized by merchants and kings alike, each one detailed with currents, depths, and hidden reefs that could shred a ship's hull. During the spring trading season, the emperor's agent arrived with an impossible request: to map the legendary Shadow Sea, where compass needles spun like leaves in autumn wind and stars seemed to dance in unfamiliar patterns. Every navigator who had ventured there either vanished or returned babbling of waters that moved against nature's laws. David accepted the challenge, confident in his mastery of maritime mathematics and astronomical calculations. But as his ship crossed the boundary into unmapped waters, something extraordinary occurred. His precisely calibrated instruments began offering contradictory readings. The stars themselves seemed to rearrange nightly, forming constellations found in no celestial chart. For 9 days he struggled to impose order on chaos, attempting to plot a rational course through waters that defied rationality. On the 10th night, in a moment of frustrated surrender, David noticed something remarkable. Beneath his ship, luminescent patterns pulsed in the depths like flowing ribbons of starlight. Following an impulse he couldn't explain, David set aside his charts and instruments. He began steering by the luminescent currents themselves, allowing his ship to be guided by these living patterns in the water. The journey became a dance with the sea's own intelligence, each turn and tack flowing naturally from moment to moment. What followed astonished his crew. The ship began moving with impossible grace through treacherous waters, as if guided by an invisible hand. They discovered routes no chart could capture, passages that seemed to appear and disappear like dreams. When they finally returned to port, David understood. True navigation wasn't about imposing order on chaos, but about joining the cosmic dance already in motion. The charts he created afterward were unlike any seen before. Instead of fixed routes, they taught sailors how to read the living language of the sea itself. Those who could surrender their need for certainty discovered journeys far more extraordinary than any planned destination. This is the eternal truth. The universe's pathways cannot be mapped, only followed. Every great journey requires us to release our grip on known ways and trust the invisible currents that guide all things. Practice the flowing way. For 13 breaths, close your eyes and imagine yourself as a ship upon vast waters. Rather than trying to chart your course, allow yourself to feel the subtle currents moving beneath you. Notice how direction emerges naturally when you trust the flow that carries all things. Remember, the greatest destinations are reached not by following maps, but by becoming one with the journey itself. Chapter 28, The Jeweler's Flawed Diamond. In the crystalline caves beneath ancient Persepolis, where light danced through gems like trapped starfire, Christina Powell was renowned as a master of diamond consciousness, one who could perceive a stone's perfect form while it still slumbered in raw crystal. For 40 days she had worked on her masterpiece, a diamond of such purity that the high priest claimed it would serve as a lens between worlds during the grand alignment. As the final day of cutting approached, Christina perceived something that made her blood run cold, a hairline fissure running through the diamond's heart, invisible to ordinary eyes, but devastating to its sacred purpose. She tried everything to work around the flaw, changing the cut's angle, adjusting the facets, even attempting ancient techniques of crystal healing. But the crack remained, like a whisper of imperfection in an otherwise perfect voice. On the night before the ceremony, as Christina sat in despair before her flawed creation, something extraordinary occurred. A shaft of moonlight struck the diamond at precisely the angle of its imperfection. Instead of diminishing the stone's beauty, the flaw caught the light and split it into colors she had never seen before, hues that seemed to exist somewhere between the known spectrum, as if the crack had become a doorway into light's hidden dimensions. As she studied this phenomenon, Christina realized that what she had perceived as a flaw was actually a kind of sacred window. The very imperfection she had fought so hard to eliminate was allowing light to enter the diamond in ways that perfection never could. The crack had created space for mystery to manifest. During the alignment ceremony, the diamond's flaw proved to be its greatest gift. Through that singular imperfection, participants glimpsed realms that perfectly formed crystals could never reveal. The priest declared it the most powerful lens ever created, precisely because it was broken in exactly the right way. This is the eternal truth. What we perceive as flaws are often doorways through which light enters our lives. Perfection is not the absence of cracks, but the presence of light shining through them. Practice. The luminous flaw. For 5 breaths, bring to mind something you consider broken or imperfect in your life. Rather than trying to fix it, imagine it as a window through which new light is entering. Feel how your very imperfections create space for the extraordinary to emerge. Remember, the universe does not flow through what is perfect, but through what is perfectly cracked open. Chapter 29, The Teacher's Speechless Moment. In the mountain monastery of ancient Tibet, where wisdom passed silently from master to student like morning mist flowing between peaks, Robert Chung taught the highest mysteries of inner transformation. For 30 years, his eloquent explanations of subtle truths had drawn seekers from distant lands. On the day of the winter solstice, when tradition called for him to reveal the monastery's most closely guarded teaching to a gathering of prepared initiates, Robert ascended the teaching platform as he had countless times before. But as he opened his mouth to speak, something unprecedented occurred. Every word he had ever known simply vanished. He stood in stark silence before hundreds of expectant faces. The carefully prepared discourse, the ancient analogies, the sacred phrases, all dissolved like frost in sunlight. The assembled students waited, at first with patience, then with growing confusion. In that moment of apparent failure, Robert did something he had never done before. He stopped trying to teach and simply allowed himself to be. As his resistance melted, an extraordinary presence began radiating from his silent form. Students later described it as though the truth itself had taken human shape before them. Without speaking a single word, Robert transmitted more in that hour of embodied silence than in 30 years of eloquent teaching. Some students wept, others laughed in spontaneous joy, while many sat in profound meditation, each receiving exactly what they needed through the pure transmission of being. The monastery's ancient scrolls were found to contain a forgotten prophecy. When the teacher becomes the teaching, No words are necessary. For truth is not spoken, but radiated, not explained, but embodied, not taught, but transmitted through the presence of one who has become it. From that day forward, Robert never again tried to teach through words alone. His very presence became the lesson, his being the teaching, his silence more eloquent than any speech. Students learned not by listening to truth, but by resonating with it directly through his embodied transmission. This is the eternal truth. The deepest wisdom cannot be spoken because it lives in the space beyond words. Real teaching happens not through explanation, but through transmission of states of being. Practice the silent teacher. For 7 breaths, release all need to explain, convince, or demonstrate anything to anyone. Simply allow yourself to be completely and without reservation. Notice how your natural state radiates its own teaching without effort. Remember, when you become the truth you wish to share, your very presence teaches more than words ever could. Chapter 30, The Seeker's Empty Hands. In the hidden valley of the 7 temples, where ancient mystery schools guarded humanity's deepest truths, Elizabeth Ward had spent 20 years mastering every sacred art. She collected initiations like precious gems, trained in the healing temples of the East, studied with desert mystics, learned secret mantras from mountain sages, and gathered countless techniques for commanding universal forces. Her medicine bag overflowed with crystals, her mind brimmed with secret knowledge, her spiritual resume stretched longer than the Silk Road itself. Yet something essential remained elusive, like a half-remembered dream that fades upon waking. On the night of a rare celestial alignment, Elizabeth made her way to the legendary Cave of Completion, where it was said the universe revealed its final secret to those deemed ready. She entered carrying scrolls of wisdom, sacred herbs, ritual implements, all her gathered spiritual treasures. As she ventured deeper into the cave's crystalline heart, a strange phenomenon began. With each step, her precious tools began disappearing, first becoming translucent, then fading like mist. Her scrolls of knowledge dissolved into whispers. Her crystals melted like snow in spring sunshine. Even her cherished memories of spiritual accomplishment evaporated like morning dew. By the time she reached the cave's innermost chamber, Elizabeth stood completely empty-handed. All her accumulated spiritual wealth had vanished, leaving her exactly as she had been before her 20-year quest began. She waited in that stripped bare state, expecting something profound to fill the void. But no new teaching appeared, no divine voice spoke, no light descended. There was only Elizabeth, standing in the perfect simplicity of her original nature, and in that moment of complete emptiness, she began laughing, a laugh that echoed through all 7 temples. She had spent 20 years trying to become something, only to discover she had always been everything she sought. The universe's greatest secret was not about gaining, but about recognizing what had never been lost. This is the eternal truth. The universe does not obey what we have learned or earned or accumulated. It responds only to our recognition of what we have always been. All seeking ends in the rediscovery of our original completeness. Practice the empty-handed way. For 7 breaths, imagine releasing everything you have gathered on your spiritual journey. All techniques, all knowledge, all accomplishments. Stand completely empty, exactly as you were before you began seeking. Notice what remains when all acquisition falls away. Remember, you are not what you have become, but what you have always been. The universe awaits only your recognition of this truth. If you enjoyed this audiobook, I created a free ebook version for you. You can download it using the link in the pinned comment. Conclusion. In the eternal city of Kemet, where the first light of wisdom dawned on humanity's sleeping consciousness, Jennifer Hayes served as keeper of the Temple of Returns. Unlike other temple guardians who maintained sacred objects or scrolls, Jennifer's role was unique. She simply sat in the temple's empty center, welcoming those who had completed their seeking. For 30 years she had watched countless seekers enter, their spirits heavy with accumulated wisdom, their minds burdened with spiritual accomplishments. Some arrived carrying sacred relics, others clutching profound revelations, all believing they had finally discovered the universe's ultimate secret. Jennifer's response was always the same, a knowing smile and 3 words: "Welcome back home." On this particular morning, as golden light filtered through ancient pillars, you stand before her with empty hands, having walked the path through all 30 chambers of mystery. Your journey has stripped away every concept, every technique, every spiritual acquisition, until only your essential nature remains. Jennifer rises and approaches, her presence radiating a familiar warmth that feels oddly like your own. "You have discovered," she says, "that the secret was never hidden in scrolls or ceremonies or sacred caves. It was hiding in plain sight, wearing your face, breathing your breath, looking through your eyes." She gestures to the temple's polished walls, where your reflection appears in countless angles. "Notice," she continues, "how each reflection shows the same truth. You are what you sought. The universe's perfect obedience was always waiting. Not for you to become something, but for you to recognize what you already were." Tears flow as understanding dawns. Every chapter of your journey, every apparent obstacle, every seeming failure was the universe's loving conspiracy to bring you back to this recognition. You had to lose everything you thought you needed to find what was never missing. This is the eternal truth. The universe's greatest secret is that there is no secret. What you seek is what seeks. The power that moves creation is not something to be attained, but something to be remembered. It is your own being recognized at last. Practice. The return. For 7 breaths, sit in the perfect simplicity of your original nature. No trying, no becoming, no seeking, just the pure recognition of what you have always been. Feel how the universe moves in perfect obedience to this recognition. Remember, you have not reached the end of a journey, but the recognition of what was true before the journey began. Welcome home. If you enjoyed this exclusive audiobook, I handpicked this next book which will change your life.